there. Coming on just so inspired after another amazing first session with a new client in my yoga therapy practice. And today wanting to come on and talk about this idea and awareness that is somewhat new about this idea of trauma and this idea that we can store trauma. And this is an issue that I'm feeling really fascinated with. I'm someone who I got to go to graduate school in psychology before I started studying and teaching yoga, and learned about things like that diagnosis where I think we first heard this word trauma, that diagnosis called PTSD, right? Where we become aware that after a severely traumatic event, like maybe we first became aware of this with things like war veterans, right? Or people who are in those types of situations, that there's this real truth to a post-traumatic stress response that can happen for us, right? Whether it manifests emotionally, physically, but that there's a real effect of that trauma. So I feel like now, years later, for me anyways, 25 years later since I was in graduate school and 20 years into being a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist, getting to work with people who are coming to me for various issues, right? Whether it's dealing with their physical health, whether it's a pain issue that's come up, some other sort of imbalance, whether it's emotional challenges, mental health struggles, or even things like excess weight, wanting to try something new, a yoga approach to even something like how to lighten up and normalize our weight. So I'm finding it so not only fascinating but important to start to weave in this topic and this understanding of trauma, and the fact that probably we could acknowledge that not only are some people traumatized, and yes, we can acknowledge that some people have that extreme, horrible experience that can absolutely correlate with the stories that we can imagine when we think of people experiencing something like post-traumatic stress as a disorder, right? But on the other hand, acknowledging that all of us probably have our trauma, right? And I'm someone who even in recent years, because I could feel so blessed and thankful for my seemingly wonderful life, it really has been wonderful, I could say, oh, I don't think I have any trauma, right? But then when I look closer, I could see that even within the seemingly most easy, beautiful lives, right, that we do have our trauma, and even sometimes generational trauma or trauma that we've picked up from ancestors or lineages that we may not even be aware of. So there's this truth I'm seeing to the fact that maybe just life can be traumatic. And even this year, right, we could see some of what we've been going through, and even what we're going through right now and worrying about, whether it's financially, health-wise, right, worries about the world, worries about the future, can be traumatic. So acknowledging, dealing with, honoring this very real truth that trauma is a thing, and that it also helps that we can become aware that it's all energy. So when we recognize that when we're going through something traumatic, it's an energetic experience, right? And that in some ways our body is finding a way to deal with that trauma, deal with the energy of that trauma, right? Whether it's an emotional situation, a physical situation, whatever it might be. And so there's an energy to that. And often what the body will do in a protective mode for us is store that trauma, store that energy, which we could also see starts to become more like stuck energy. But this energy that we start to store as our trauma. So we have this energy stored in our bodies, and it's just feeling so fascinating to me to bring in the awareness of the truth that we have this thing called trauma, and it affects our bodies. And I'm so thankful for this continual awareness and getting to share that with the people that I am so fortunate to work with in looking at how they want to change and transform their lives and their experience with their bodies, right? And how much it can be important to acknowledge this truth that most of us, if not all of us, have some trauma. Even current life can be experienced as trauma, right? And so that's where, though, attending to it as energy, taking care of it all as energy, and doing something more like each day to take care of that energy, to manage that energy, to even free up and let go of some of that stored trauma energy, right? And doing that through our amazing practices, like our use of poses and breath that help us manage our energy and free up stuck energy, even that stored trauma energy, in a very gentle way, though. That's where there's this new perspective, and even a lot of new trainings out now about teaching yoga teachers even how to be sensitive and aware of the fact that at least some of us are traumatized, and some of the ways that even yoga has been presented in really not a very yoga way, in my opinion, and being more forceful and pushing the body, for instance, can be creating more trauma and completely inappropriate, and even more trauma, right? For someone who is dealing with that stored trauma. So there's now this yoga, this trauma-sensitive yoga that's becoming a new thing. So yeah, just wanting to share my awareness of how it does seem valuable and powerful to acknowledge that we might have that stored trauma, that might be part of what's happening for us, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, right? That it might be related to that stored trauma. And then the more that we can do to take care of that, which can be things that we do to ourselves and for ourselves, and then also for sure to receive that energy work and healing from others is beautiful. But yeah, so both receiving it from others and knowing that the power of when we're doing even things like our journaling is helping us release that, right? And often it is too, just though, about feeling the feelings, right? It goes with it that are gonna come up maybe in some of being with ourselves, facing ourselves, feeling some of those truths. So that's where that feeling, the feelings, to free the feelings seems important. So being willing to say cry, right, is a helpful piece of also releasing that stored trauma. And then it's all energy, right? And then again, just anything that can help us attend to that energy. Things like dance, things like breath, things like nature. Definitely what we're tuning into with our minds, right? Who we're listening to is all part of that as well. But yeah, hopefully that's helpful to you. This kind of renewed awareness about trauma and how we can understand it, see how it's playing a role in some of our symptoms, or even things like excess weight could often be about that stored trauma. And so that's where, as we take care of ourselves gently, lovingly, but energetically, that this is, where we can really see those powerful shifts. But it's because we're honoring that we've got that trauma, and we're finding some ways to resolve that, right? To take care of that, and to build into our lifestyles ways to just every day now take care of ourselves, amidst the fact that maybe every day there are things that we could take on as traumatic, and then also our response to life also, right, can determine how traumatic it's going to be. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I see I'm traumatizing myself and I don't even need to. So that's where our practices help too, to make sure we're not creating that trauma for ourselves, right? Just in our response to life, because maybe we're forgetting how we really want to focus and feel. So anyways, a little from me today on this topic of trauma, from my practice and learning to yours. So love you guys so much. Thanks for being here. Namaste.